Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me. As always, Week 11 of the college football season has concluded. Week 10 of the NFL season finishing up tonight with Monday Night Football. And here at Saturday to Sunday, we continue to cover every aspect of the NFL draft, wire to wire, checking in on last year's rookies in the NFL Rookie Report, and then a quick Fantasy Dynasty Report discussing the major storylines in the NFL from a dynasty fantasy perspective. But as always, we start with the 2025 NFL Draft Report. And as we have been doing pretty much every week this season, the conversation has to start at the quarterback position. This past week, the two guys that I think are started to separate from the pack in terms of QB1 and QB2 in this draft class, both were in action. Shadu Sanders, 30 of 43, 291 yards and 3 touchdowns. Big victory for Colorado over Texas Tech. Sanders continues to show why he, if you just view it from the football perspective, may and or should be the QB1 in this class. He continues to elevate those around him. You will hear me say it every week, basically. You'll hear me say it in the pre-draft process. Besides Travis Hunter, there's probably not another player on that offense who's going to be playing in the NFL. And every week, Shadu Sanders is rising to the occasion. He's got to score a lot of points because they have a lot of issues on defense as well. But Sanders rises to the moment. Again, when push comes to shove, I think in terms of overall arm talent, in terms of the ability to make any throw, good enough arm talent, good touch, can throw with anticipation, good accuracy and ball placement, can throw on the move. There's a lot to like about Shadu Sanders' game. Now, again, I've also been on record as saying there's no elite traits. He doesn't have top-end arm talent in terms of velocity or strength. He doesn't have top-end accuracy or ball placement. He's not a great athlete. He's a good athlete who probably can do more with his legs if needed, but just doesn't. He looks to win from the pocket. I like the poise. I like his ability to keep his eyes downfield when he moves around the pocket. But what he's doing at Colorado in terms of keeping them in games, leading them to victories, I think because some people want to find criticisms because of the hoopla that surrounds Colorado and Prime, that he doesn't get the attention he deserves in terms of his caliber of quarterback prospecting. And before he even transferred to Colorado, he had piqued my interest before the previous college football season, and he's done nothing except enhance that over the last 2 years there at Colorado. It'll be interesting to kind of see them down the stretch here with potentially some big games as well to see how he performs. The other guy in the mix to be one of the top quarterbacks in the 2025 NFL draft is Cam Ward. Miami finally couldn't pull out the victory. They had seen a lot of games where they had some ups and downs in the first half and then big comebacks in the second half to pull out victories. This week, they were unable to do that against Georgia Tech. Cam Ward, 25 of 39, 343 yards and 3 touchdowns. He did his part, but Miami's defense let them down and just not enough possessions to let Cam Ward, pull the comeback in that one as well. Right now, I think it's neck and neck between those two. I still think the next name I'm going to bring up could maybe enter the mix, and that name is Jalen Milroe. Obviously, Alabama this past weekend rolled over LSU. He only threw 12 of 18 passes for 109 yards, but 12 carries, 185 yards rushing, and 4 touchdowns. The X factor that he brings, we're talking on a level of Michael Vick, Lamar Jackson. Like, we're talking about a quarterback who can probably run in the mid 4.3s. Like, it is a special kind of athlete. It changes the narrative in terms of how you could defend this team because of what he can do with his legs. And Milroe, while there's still a lot of inconsistencies in terms of his quarterbacking skill, this is not a guy who can't push the ball vertically down the field. I think you can make the case that Jalen Milroe's best trait as a passer is his vertical passing ability. So he's got the vertical passing ability. He's got this special athleticism. Listen, we saw Anthony Richardson go high. We've seen other guys go high. I think a team is still going to be into Jalen Milroe in the top 10 of the NFL draft. They've been my top 3 quarterbacks for a couple weeks now. I don't see a scenario where I come off of that. It would take a lot for me to move those 3. I could see me reshuffling those 3 for sure. Milroe, Ward, and Sanders. I just think Ward and Sanders are a little bit further advanced in terms of their passing acumen, in terms of progressions, mental processing, accuracy, ball placement. So that's why they're ahead of Jalen Milroe. But if you're talking about straight upside, straight ceiling, I do think that's Jalen Milroe. We've had that conversation this year as well. So I think those are the guys. I think we have a 1A, 1B in Sanders and Cam Ward. And then I think Jalen Milroe sits behind them kind of in his own tier. But it's games like this, even in terms of, I know this was more just with the legs, but if you're looking for that special trait, if they're looking for that special characteristic, Milroe has that. And then if you believe the passing stuff can become functional, become average, then you're talking about a major weapon at the next level due to that athleticism. And that's where you can see him potentially, move up into that top 10 mix for sure. Garrett Nussmeier in that same game against Jalen Milroe really struggled, 27-42, 239 yards, 2 interceptions. Listen, we've talked a lot about Nussmeier. I like his game. There's traits about him that I'm intrigued with. He can throw in anticipation better than probably any quarterback in college football. I'm just not sure with the inexperience and now the inconsistencies, if it just doesn't make sense for him to go back to school for another year, round out the edges, further develop, and then he puts himself into the mix next year. Obviously Nico and Arch probably sit at the top of that quarterback class, but who's to say Nussmeier, can't be third in that class and still be a top 10 pick. And right now, I'm not sure Nussmeier would go in the top 10 right now. I think a couple of teams I think would like him. Maybe he can go late round 1 or somewhere in round 2. I think it would take some strong play down the stretch here for him to maybe push his way into like the top 10, top 15 mix, even though some teams may like the traits that he can bring. So I do wonder if Nussmeier could be headed back to school. Carson Beck, speaking of guys who I don't really know what to make of Carson Beck's overall performance this year. It looks like a different player compared to what we've seen in the past. I was never completely head over heels into Carson Beck. Like somewhere last year, even somewhere into that before the year started. I had Shadu as my number 1 quarterback in the summer, but I did think Carson Beck was on the trajectory to at least be in the mix. I'm not sure how right now first round is even in the slightest of conversation. To me now, I think the conversation is even a round 2 guy. Like I think that's where we are right now with Carson Beck. I mean, he's playing with that. We talked about the cast around Shadu Sanders. Carson Beck's playing at Georgia. They have 5-star recruits all over the football field. They've been dominant for years and years, and he's just been dreadful. I mean, this past week against Ole Miss, Carson Beck really struggled to move the football. The interceptions continue to just kind of pile up every single week this year. So I'm not really sure what to say about Carson Beck. Unless Georgia has some games down the stretch here where he really looks like his old self, I have a hard time thinking first round is even a possibility and wonder if the second round is even in play anymore with a guy with what we've seen from Carson Beck this year. Jackson Dart in that game, I've talked about him a little bit this year, 199 yards and touchdown, 50 yards rushing. Listen, I put Jackson Dart on the caliber of prospect from a couple of years ago when we had Desmond Ridder and Malik Willis and Matt Corral going the 3rd round. That's where I kind of think Jackson Dart's skill set is. So if a team wants to pull a trigger in the 3rd round and, look at it as maybe we strike lightning and find a starter in the 3rd round, if not, maybe a quality backup, I think that's where his skill set kind of warrants, similar to those guys. But we've seen none of those guys really pan out to even be serviceable backups. We'll see. Malik Willis has looked a little bit better in Green Bay this year, so we'll see if he could materialize into at least a quality backup. That's not the case with Matt Corral. It's not the case with Desmond Ridder. Ridder had his chance and flopped. I don't think we'll ever see him in the starting role again, and maybe not even like a clear-cut backup moving forward. So we'll see about Dart. I do think there are some traits to his game that are intriguing, but I just don't see the athletic and physical traits as a NFL team looking at him as a guy who could be their franchise quarterback and be their starting quarterback. Quinn Ewers bounced back this week against Florida for 333 yards and 5 touchdowns. He's still an interesting guy that, could put himself in the mix. Texas, I think, is still going to have a chance to play some important games down the stretch here. He has the physical traits. He can make he can make big time throws. He's got the arm talent, but has not been the consistency and continued growth that we wanted to see. We saw it in the beginning of the year, and then that injury kind of just stifled that growth this year. But he's another guy that could maybe put himself in the situation where maybe he's in the top 50 mix. Maybe he finishes strongly and puts himself back in the round 1 mix. I have a hard time seeing that right now. And then the other name I want to bring up is it came out this past weekend that Miller Moss is looking to transfer out of USC. So obviously that takes the picture out of declaring if he's looking into the transfer portal, and the word was that he was maybe eyeing Michigan. That piqued my interest a little bit. I know it's just, some rumors, but if he ends up with the Wolverines, we've seen their offense really struggle this year because of the quarterback play. Miller Moss goes there, he could really use that as a springboard to his NFL draft stock as well. So I am following his transfer portal discussion very closely because I do like Miller Moss's traits. I do think he was a guy that it really has intrigued me since the first week of the season when we saw him in that game against LSU on Labor Day weekend. So if he ends up in Michigan, we're going to see a lot of him. We're going to see him in big games. That is something that I think could really move the landscape a little bit in terms of the college football season next year as well. Let's take this over to the running back. I want to bring up Caleb Johnson. We've been talking about him over the last month or so. When I did updated rankings a couple of weeks ago, I said, he was now in the mix right after, that group after Ashton Genty. You had Quinshon Judkins, you had Travion Henderson, Omarion Hampton, Ollie Gordon. And I said, now Caleb Johnson and Woody Marks in the mix there with Caleb Johnson, skyrocketing in terms of his draft stock. A lot of buzz over the last week or so that maybe he's in the mix to be RB2 in this class, which I don't think is something that obviously anybody first saw a scenario with how strong the class was with Hampton and Gordon and the Ohio State duo. But now I think as these years played on, and we've talked a lot about it here, that Ashton Genty has completely separated himself from everybody in the country. Ollie Gordon's had an up and down season. Omarion Hampton's been good, not great. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson have been very subpar in terms of the expectations that we had on those two. I mean, this past week, Ohio State won 45-0, and Quinshon Judkins had 11 rushes for 32 yards. We're talking 2.9 yards a carry. Like, if you give Ashton Genty 11 carries, you're never going to see a game where it says 32 yards. So I like Judkins. I've never been all in on him. I still think he's worthy of a day 2 talent. But I do think the door is now opened after Ashton Genty that maybe somebody else can seize control, and maybe Caleb Johnson is that guy. Travion Henderson this past week, 6 carries, 85 yards. We know who he is. He's going to be a big play complement to a team that has a physical run game. Henderson's going to be the perfect complement. 12 touches, 13 touches. Could use him in a variety of ways. Great on the outside, run scheme stuff to get him to the perimeter. He'd be great in any of the Shanahan type schemes. But he's a home run hitter. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to carry a heavy workload, 18, 20, 22 touches. I just don't think that's Henderson's game. So Judkins hasn't been as dominant as I think we expected at Ohio State. Henderson has been good, not great either. Gordon has had some ups and downs, and Hampton's been good, like I said. But I think Caleb Johnson is now putting himself in that mix with how good he's been this year. I do think we're going to see Genty go in round 1, and I am starting to wonder if we see anybody in round 2, or there's a little bit of a gap, and then we start seeing running backs go off the board in round 3, and then round 3, round 4, round 5 have a lot, because I do think it's a very strong class still. I just think Genty's the only one that kind of warrants going early, and then I think people and teams might look at him and say, we could wait. There's not that big of a difference who somebody we might take in round 2, and if we happen to lose out on him, all right, we'll pivot to a different running back in round 3 or round 4. Are they that different that we need to pick them 40 picks early or 60 picks earlier? I'm not sure about that. Some other names from this week: Phil Maffa out of Clemson, 26 carries, 128 yards. I think he's looking as a day 3, round 5, round 6 player, but very tough physical interior runner. He's put together a couple of strong performances for Clemson this year. He's the typical north-south power gap scheme runner to complement, another back in an NFL backfield. Preferably the other one more shifty or more of a home run play, almost like a thunder and lightning type scenario. That would be Maffa. Devin Neal intrigues me a lot out of Kansas, 116 yards, 2 touchdowns this week. He's up to 874 yards and 10 rushing touchdowns. I feel like he's kind of put together a really strong year. Hasn't gotten a lot of notoriety. I think he's in that round four mix as well. I like Devin Neal's big playability. Taj Brooks for Texas Tech. He's up to almost 1,200 yards, 1,184 yards, and 11 touchdowns this past week versus Colorado. He had 137-1. Listen, Brooks is not going to be for everybody, but similar to how I talked about Maffa, he's a tough, physical interior runner, great leg drive, great power. So Brooks could have a role at the next level. Think James Robinson when he had some success at the NFL level for a short period of time for Jacksonville. I think Taj Brooks coming off what it's going to be a great 2 years of production at Texas Tech, could see himself called somewhere in that mid to late day Bree range and add to a backfield, but tough physical interior runner. And then I'll just keep bringing him up. Raheem Rocket Sanders, what we've seen from him this year is a rebirth compared to the guy that we thought we were going to get a couple years ago. Really has been looking good this year. Another 126 yards and 2 touchdowns, 2 catches, 52 yards and a receiving touchdown as well this week. Rocket Sanders continues to see him elevate his stock, maybe back into that round 3, round 4 mix. I think he's going to test out fairly well for bigger backs, especially in terms of his straight line speed. So Sanders is a guy who I think has really catapulted his draft stock back into that round 3 to round 5 mix, when before the season started, we might have been looking at round 6, round 7 UDFA type player coming off the poor season he had last year. If you're taking this to the pass catchers at the wide receiver position, Jaden Higgins this past week, 7 catches, 88 yards. We've talked about him a couple times this year. Wanted to acknowledge again the strong year he's having, 62 catches, almost 800 yards and 7 touchdowns. I think he's squarely in that round 3, round 4 mix as well. Guy who can go up and get it, the ball skills, the body control, the ability to adjust. We're seeing it week in and week out with Jaden Higgins. Travis Hunter, we mentioned Shadu Sanders before, 9 catches, 99 yards and a touchdown. I'm having a hard time anymore seeing Tet McMillan or Luther Burden go before Travis Hunter. I just think the versatility of Travis Hunter, the special athleticism, the special hand-eye coordination, the ball skills, I just think it's going to be Hunter before any of them. I definitely think him over Burden is almost a lock at this point. I do think some teams could look at Tet McMillan based on what they have in their wide receiver room and potentially, say McMillan's more of what we're looking for. But I do think when push comes to shove, Travis Hunter is going to be the first wide receiver taken off the board. It'll be interesting to see if that's the position he wants to play. And if so, how much, 2 ways he's going to do and play corner as well. Unknown at this point. Kyron Lacey, 5 catches, 79 yards and 1 touchdown. He's another guy really came on this year to add another solid prospect, probably in that round 3, the round 4 mix as well at the wide receiver position. Another guy can win vertically down the field, can go up and get it. I love his ability to adjust and high point to the football. Lacey's had a really strong year this year for LSU. At the tight end position, Elijah Arroyo out of Miami is a guy who's kind of been talked about in the college world for many years. Injuries have kind of hindered him throughout his collegiate career, but this year, 20 catches, 403 yards and 5 touchdowns. So this is a tight end who can stretch the field, attack the seam, get vertical, like what we've seen out of Elijah Arroyo this year with Cam Ward in Miami. Jake Brinstool at Clemson, 3 catches, 39 yards and a touchdown. After the top 3 tight ends, I think it's wide open. I think Brinstool has as good of a chance as anybody to be the 4th tight end in this class. If you're looking for that pure pass-catching tight end prospect, I think Brinstool is one of the best in that regards. And then Tyler Warren, who I think is very much in the mix with Colston Loveland to be the 1st or 2nd tight end taken. 8 catches, 75 yards, continues to show why he's probably the most versatile, completely balanced tight end prospect in all of college football. We take this next to the NFL rookie report for week 10 of the NFL season. The Caleb Williams' struggles probably hit its peak this past week. Chicago looking horrendously in a terrible loss to New England at home. Caleb Williams was 116 of 30 for 120 yards. Right now, he had that like 3-game stretch where things kind of settled down. He looked like a great prospect. And the guy who was the number 1 overall pick, things have really struggled since then. The offensive scheme, the offensive play caller, not doing him any favors. The infrastructure around him, not doing any favors. But listen, we've seen Caleb Williams on bad football teams, and he did not elevate. We talked about Shadu Sanders before. Look what Shadu Sanders has done for Colorado. Caleb Williams, I know, didn't do as well at USC as I think many people would have expected for the talent that USC has. USC was a more talented team than Colorado. Shadu Sanders continues to elevate that team around them. Caleb did not do that. And listen, I still am in on Caleb Williams. I'm not ready to sound the alarms, but Chicago needs to get the right coach in there. They need to fix the O-line again. They need to get the right infrastructure. They got to make sure DJ Moore, get him back going, get Rome Odunze going. But right now, besides a couple weeks where he looked really impressive, it's been a very struggling season for Caleb Williams. And I'm not sure we're going to see it get any better down the home stretch of this season based on what we've seen so far. Bo Nix, 22 of 30, 215 yards and 2 touchdowns for Denver versus Kansas City, led them down the field, got him into easy field goal range to steal the victory, which would have been an impressive performance by the Bo Nix-led Broncos. And then Kansas City blocks the short field goal attempt to end the game. But we are seeing Bo Nix as a guy who's really starting to look comfortable in that Sean Payton scheme. We talked about it, not just us, but everybody. It was the perfect marriage between scheme and player, and that's the reason why I think he went as high as he did. If Denver wasn't into him, I'm not even sure if he goes in round 1. I think he could have fallen maybe even at around 1, but he did end up there, and it looked really poor early in the season. But Bo Nix has really started to come together, and we love to see it, right? We want prospects to be successful. I still have my reservations about whether he's a guy who can lead a team to Super Bowls and deep playoff runs. And when there's asked a lot on his plate, I think he probably will not rise up to be that level of quarterback prospect. And I think that's what all teams should be shooting for in round 1 of the NFL draft. But I do think he is morphing himself into a very functional player, and especially his rookie year. We've seen a lot of improvement in the short amount of time he's been there and the short amount of time he's starting. I'm sure there'll still be some more ups and downs, but Nix has kind of turned this season around, turned the Broncos season around, and has them playing good football. And Nix is, if we just straight what we've seen, Nix has been better so far than Caleb Williams. And I think a lot of that could do with the surrounding environment, the scheme, Sean Payton, compared to, the Bears offensive play caller and scheme right now. But Nix has been as good, if not better, than Caleb Williams this year. I'm not sure anybody could have seen that coming before the year started. Drake May, we talked about that Chicago game. He gets the victory over Caleb Williams, 184 yards and a touchdown. Speaking of poor infrastructure, they got a lot of work to do building up around Drake May in New England. But I think we've seen enough glimpses already that what made him such a intriguing high-end quarterback prospect. Drake May does really have everything. If he could put it all together in terms of consistency, he could be a high-end quarterback at the next level. At the running back position, I think the two big things is Tyron Tracy continues to look really good. I now have him inside my top 20 overall dynasty backs, which is always scary for a day three guy who doesn't have the draft capital. But the Giants have so many holes. I just don't see them going to the well with a top 100 pick at the running back position. So where you got to be careful sometimes is like, when the Jets drafted Michael Wilson and then Michael Carter, and then the following year, Breece Hall. I don't think the Giants are in a position to do that, even in a strong running back class. So I think Tyrone Tracy is going to be the guy there going into the next year. And at that point, he's a really intriguing player. I loved him in the pre-draft process. He was my number 5 running back. I went on the Harris Football Podcast. I talked him up when nobody was really talking him up too much, especially in the dynasty circles and the fantasy circles. but there was a lot of Alvin Kamara, David Johnson to his game in college, and we're starting to see some of that, the contact balance, the home run ability, the receiving ability. He's very inexperienced and raw to the position, but he's already performing at a very high level with a very poor quarterback for the Giants. If they could upgrade on that and be a more functional offense, we really could see Tyrone Tracy be a major, major weapon in fantasy moving forward. Audric Estime led the Broncos in rushes this past week, looked the best, 14 carries, 53 yards. I've been saying since the summer that I was in on Estime. I thought it was a matter of when, not if, he took the job from Javonte Williams. It looks like that is in the process of happening. He was handpicked by Sean Payton. Sean Payton has always had that tough physical runner, Mark Ingram. Some year, like it was Kyrie Robinson for a year. It was Chris Ivory for a period of time. I think he looks at Estime very much in that like Ivory, Kyrie Robinson, Mark Ingram way. Maybe Pierre Thomas, not as physical as those guys, but had that physicality to his game as well. So I think stock major up on Audric Estime. At the wide receiver position, Ricky Pearsall found the end zone. Great story back, after getting shot before the season started. But I think the interesting thing is how did things play out with San Francisco in the offseason, right? They gave Ayuk the money, but then he suffers the season-ending injury. Is Debo going to be back next year? If Debo's not back next year, Ricky Pearsall really elevates himself into serious fantasy consideration. If Debo's back, it's kind of a wait and see for down the line and opening maybe for him to be viable. But I would want to get Pearsall on my teams now because my guess is because of the look at, they still have Debo, they have Ayuk, they have Kittle, they have C-Mac. He's probably option 5. Jawan Jennings is good. I don't think Ricky Pearsall is going to cost. I think his stock overall has went down since before the season started. I think his NFL rookie draft value has went down since people took him probably in the early to mid-second round of rookie drafts. I think there's more questions now. I think a lot of people thought Ayuk was going to be gone. Then they give him the big money. We've seen Jawan Jennings be productive. So I think Ricky Pearsall's stock is probably lower now than it was when he was drafted in the second round of most rookie drafts last year. A.D. Mitchell had an opportunity this week, 6 catches, 71 yards. A lot to like about his game. Very raw, very unrefined, but a lot of physical traits that stand out about A.D. Mitchell. Let's conclude tonight with the NFL Fantasy Dynasty Report. A couple things I want to talk about in terms of dynasty value. I think right now, there's a legitimate question on how you can rank the top 3 dynasty quarterbacks: Lamar, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, right? Those 3, I think you can make the case in any which way that they can be 1, 2, 3 in your dynasty rankings. I think people had Josh Allen there before the year started. I don't think he's really done anything to not still be up there, but how good Jaden Daniels is looked as in his rookie year. How good Lamar has looked this year. And Lamar is just stacking up seasons, of high-end production on a great franchise. Baltimore is good every single year. He's still got his rushing component to him. He's a very efficient passer. So I think the case can be made of how to rank Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Jane Daniels. They would be the top 3 for me right now. I think I'd go Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jane Daniels. I think that would be the order in which I would have them in Dynasty. But I think a strong case can be made to move them in any which way to be your top 3 quarterbacks in Dynasty Fantasy at the moment. At the running back position, a couple stock ups of guys that I could have never imagined. If we would have had this conversation in August, I never would have imagined that during this NFL season, I would be saying stock up on the following 3 players: J.K. Dobbins, James Conner, and Tony Pollard. Redraft, maybe. Dynasty, didn't see it happening. J.K. Dobbins looks better than ever. Are we 1 game away from a major injury? Maybe, but maybe he's finally over the injuries. Some of it's always bad luck. Maybe, we're going to finally see the best of J.K. Dobbins for a couple years here, which would be unbelievable. I loved J.K. Dobbins when he was coming out. I would love nothing more to see a couple year stretch here where J.K. Dobbins is the player we all thought he could be coming into the NFL. So stock up on J.K. Dobbins. James Conner, I think everybody, myself included, was just inevitably waiting for Trey Benson to take that job from him this year. And at this point now, James Conner is a free agent. Does Arizona think about bringing him back? A 2-year, whatever, $18 million contract, or 2 years, $16 million contract, something like that, right? We saw David Montgomery. I think, Conner probably is looked at very similarly in terms of a talent, similar to Montgomery. Obviously, I think a slightly maybe a year older. But I could see Conner coming back to Arizona. And if that's the case, that really hampers Trey Benson's dynasty stock. If he's not back in Arizona, could a team who is a contender look at James Conner, have some money to be like, okay, we can go out and upgrade at the running back position, and maybe James Conner's that guy. So I think this is stock up. Again, running back dynasty windows, you should be looking short. So J.K. Dobbins, 2 years. James Conner, we talked about Alvin Kamara recently. We talked about Joe Mixon recently. But James Conner also stock up. I think he could, the rest of this year, another full year, could still be a very good RB2 with RB1 spiked weeks mixed in. And then Tony Pollard. Pollard looks as good as he did 2 years ago. I know Titans offense, not a really good offense, but Tony Pollard has kept Tajay Spears at bay. He looks explosive. He looks fast. He looks like the guy that went in the first round of redraft years a year ago because of how good he looked the year before. So they went out and invested in Pollard on the first day of free agency. I think we're talking about a guy who's probably going to be a solid RB2 for at least the next year and a half, maybe longer. That's as far as we can go. But again, before the season started, most people wanted to put Spears ahead of him. Most people thought it would just be inevitable that Spears would take the lead role from Pollard, and Pollard has kind of dissed himself from Spears. Connor's further cemented himself as the clear guy with Benson far in the wings, and J.K. Dobbins has clearly iced out guys like Gus Edwards. Kamani Vidal hasn't taken on anything there, and J.K. Dobbins has really separated himself from the bunch there as well. And if he stays healthy, there's no reason why he can't continually be this productive. We know he's got high-end talent for sure. And let's end with some wide receiver discussion for this week. Couple stock up, stock down. Stock up on Khalil Shakir. He's morphing into that reliable slot wide receiver, but a little bit more vertical component to it than, say, a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson. And we've seen Buffalo, we've seen Josh Allen really rely on the slot receiver to be one of the functional, important pieces of that. I think a lot of people thought that was going to be Dalton Kincaid. It's just not. Kincaid's a good, solid tight end. He's not going to be a guy who I think is looked at the way, like, when he first was drafted in round 1, I think people thought he might be a guy who could be the focal point of a pass offense for Buffalo. Josh Allen's Travis Kelce, so to speak. That hasn't materialized, and I have a hard time thinking it's going to. I think we might see more productive years from Dalton Kincaid than this, but I think they're not going to be where he's the clear focal point. And the relationship that is forming with Shakir and Josh Allen is one that I still want to get in on now, with the trade of Amari Cooper, with the drafting of Keon Coleman, basically late round 1, early round 2. There's a lot to like. I think Shakir would not come at a very high cost, and I think he could be a really rock solid wide receiver at 3-4 for a couple of years there in Buffalo. Stock up on Terry McLaurin. He's older than we think. Like, he doesn't seem like he would be as old as he is. So I was a little lukewarm on him. Didn't know how quickly Jane Daniels' passing acumen would be represented in terms of his NFL success and fantasy success in terms of his passing ability. But Jane Daniels put that to rest. And Terry McLaurin is clearly became the alpha. No question. I don't see that changing anytime soon. So I think stock up on Terry McLaurin, stock way down on Deontay Johnson. At this point, that trade with Baltimore has kind of almost completely derailed his value. He is a free agent at the end of the year, so maybe he ends up somewhere else. But based on the compensation that Baltimore gave up to get him, it makes me feel that the NFL is not nearly as in or as high on Deontay Johnson as maybe the fantasy community and the media is. So that leaves me some concerns that there might not be much of a market there in terms of, here's $15 million, here's $13 million, here's the money that Gabe Davis got or Darnell Mooney got. Maybe he gets that, but maybe not. And we'll see if he gets that opportunity to be a guy who is looked at in that wide receiver 3-4 value for fantasy as well. If people are still going on name value, I might be willing to sell on him, get out now, see if I can get a round 2 rookie pick and go from there. So there it is, guys, the Dynasty Fantasy Report for week 10 of the NFL season, NFL rookie report for week 10 of the NFL season, and then most importantly, the 2025 NFL draft report for week 11 of the college football season. If you're enjoying this content, please get over to the website, SS Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. Check out the premium content tab, and for $9.99, you get access to all of our premium notebooks. You get the Scouting notebook, almost 100 detailed player profiles. I got a lot of updates to do on that. Haven't had a chance to do too many updates since the season started, but there'll be a lot of updates, a lot of prospects added, tons of stuff edited and updated after the college football season, but some of it will be in the months of November and December as well. Strengths, functional areas, developmental areas, NFL role, NFL draft projection, fantasy spin. You get that for all the prospects in there. You get the rankings notebook, all our different rankings updated constantly. The draft eligible rankings, the dynasty rookie rankings updated throughout their NFL season, Devy rankings, positional overall dynasty rankings, and then after the NFL draft, the next wave of dynasty rookie rankings as well. And then in April, you get the NFL 2025 NFL draft projections notebook, tabs for every position, offense and defense, over 400 prospects in the notebook, their combine measurements, their combine testing, strengths, developmental areas, snapshot of who they are, ranked in the order in which everything we're hearing, reading, and listening, trying to project how they're going to come off the board on draft weekend. We've had tremendous success with our projecting the 32 players to come off the board in round one, the 100 or so players to come off the board in the first 3 rounds, and the 255 or so players to come off the board in all 7 rounds. We've had 80 to 85% success rate collectively for each of those big board tabs. It is a great resource to have leading into the draft weekend, UDFA period, training camps, preseason, but how many details there are on so many of these new wave of NFL players once they get drafted. So if you've never purchased it before, please consider purchasing it at $9.99. It is the lifeblood of what keeps us going here at Saturday Sunday. If you've purchased it in the past but haven't purchased it yet this year, we hope that you consider to purchase it again as well. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Twitter, email, leave a comment on the YouTube thing, and I could get back to you if you have any questions about the notebooks. So on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.